Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Lanisha Lightbourne, the Business Development Manager for Asset Management and High Net Worth Services at the Bermuda Business Development Agency, also known as the BDA. The BDA is an independent public-private partnership, and our focus is on promoting the jurisdiction and encouraging economic development and inward direct investment. We have teamed up with AIMA for a three-part series of Lunch and Learn webinars. Today, we bring together some of the jurisdiction's experts to discuss the ongoing development and offering of Bermuda investment fund industry. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will hand it over to our moderator, Ben.
Thank you, Lanisha, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to the BDA and AIMA for collaborating to create this series of 3 webcast events focused on alternative assets in Bermuda. This is the 3rd webcast today, and we'll be discussing digital assets and economic substance. As all of us following AIMA and the BDA and LinkedIn will know, both groups have been incredibly active in engaging membership over the past few challenging months. With that said, I'm excited to start today's discussion. As a background, I'm a chartered accountant with over 10 years of experience in Bermuda. My current role at EY is in the insurance practice, working with many of our local and international clients in both the asset management and ILS sectors. Our panelists today offer many years of industry experience, but I'd now like to introduce them both, starting with Natalie Netto. Natalie, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. So my name is Natalie Netto. I'm a partner in the corporate department at Walker's, in Walker's Bermuda's office. I head up the fintech team at Walker's, and I also am a member of the government task force, which was tasked with the implementation of Bermuda's economic substance laws.
Thank you, Natalie. Murad?
Hi, everyone. My name is Moad Fahmy, and although I have a white shirt, a headset, and the picture of a bird's eye view of flats, some of you might believe I'm an airline pilot, but I'm not. I'm the senior advisor for fintech at the Bermuda Monetary Authority. So I lead the team that's responsible for licensing and supervision of digital asset businesses in the jurisdiction, and previously with a Canadian regulator.
Thank you, Murad. And before we begin, there will be some time for some Q&A toward the end of today's discussion. So please feel free to submit any questions as we work through the program. With that said, I'd like to kick off with a question to Natalie. Natalie, why is Bermuda so engaged in the digital asset space? So can you give us a short overview of the Digital Assets Business Act and the wider digital assets framework in place in Bermuda?
Sure. So back in 2007, as part of a government-led fintech strategy, Bermuda became one of the first to adopt fit-for-purpose legislation, which governs both the issuance of digital assets and also the carrying on of digital assets business activities. I think Bermuda recognized the need to have certainty and regulation in the space to offer protection to investors and to customers, but to be flexible in doing so and to have legislation which is proportionate to the risks of this new line of business as it was then. So Digital Assets Business Act, or DABA as it's affectionately known, is our landmark legislation. As I said, it offers legal certainty, and it has not only been enacted in 2008, but it's already been amended to cater for changes that have happened in the industry and the evolution of the fintech sector. So it's been widened to capture digital assets businesses such as trading in digital assets derivatives and acting as a benchmark administrator, for example, as the fintech sector has evolved. It's possible to have both a sandbox and a full license under DABA. You need to present a business plan and satisfy minimum licensing criteria. And of course, the application goes to our regulator, the BMA. The BMA is the sole financial services regulator responsible for the supervision and oversight of the insurance and the funds industry in Bermuda. And the credibility of the BMA has been born from sort of 50 plus years of regulation and supervision, particularly in the innovative insurance space. So has meant that it's it's been a really good fit as a regulator of this new and evolving sector. Not only DABA, we didn't just implement DABA, which is our landmark legislation, but we also set about putting in place a legal framework and a regulatory framework to capture the whole and foster the whole fintech environment. So that has seen amendments to the Insurance Act with its own sandbox licensing regime, which has been quite successful, particularly recently, and changes to the classes of insurer to capture innovative insurers and intermediaries. We've also seen amendments to the Banking Act to allow banks to offer restricted banking services to digital assets companies. That's an area of great interest and great concern for fintech businesses who up until that point had struggled to find solutions, and I think that is a continuing, we're continuing to find ways to solve those issues. More recently, in October last year, the government announced what it's called the Currency Standard Initiative, and that is an initiative to try to bring the entire Bermuda online and digitized. So it will now be possible to pay government fees and taxes through the development of this initiative in digital assets. And we expect to see a lot of interest and participation from the fintech sector. So that's super exciting. So I think all in the round, this has placed Bermuda at the forefront of digital infrastructure and tech, as well as banking and payment services and gateways. And so I do, it's exciting to see where this will take us. But it's great that we were an early adopter of this technology, and and that we've been able to get a head start in this sector.
Thank you, Natalie. Mawad, any thoughts from you on this topic from the perspective of a regulator?
Yeah, I think to the question of why Bermuda is so engaged in digital assets, I think it's got to do with Bermuda's rich history of financial services innovation, and the BMA has played a role in this innovation story in the past by being both pragmatic and progressive regulator. I think it provides for the creation of a regulatory environment that is unique because it seeks to regulate the entire ecosystem of digital assets, not only pieces of it. And this is made possible because the BMA is an integrated regulator that covers all financial sectors. So really, I think this evolution is rooted in Bermuda's rich history of innovation that's been enabled by close collaboration between government regulators and industry participants.
Thank you, Mawad. And sticking with you, if I may here, why is it important for the BMA to be involved early in this sector? And do you think cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology are fads, or are they here to stay?
Right. The digital assets and blockchain have celebrated their 10-year mark recently. It seems more apparent than ever that they are here to stay. However, no one has a crystal ball, but when you look at financial market infrastructure and the amount of energy that is spent on agreeing on the state of affairs at a single point in time, and learning from the past financial crisis where it was almost impossible to understand what was happening at one point in some key financial market infrastructures in the US specifically, I think it makes for an environment where there's got to be an important discussion on how we can make these infrastructure better. And likely blockchain and distributed ledger can be part of the solution. But even if 20 years down the line or whatnot, we find out that there's a better solution out there, at least it will have started an important conversation on how we make these infrastructures better. Beyond that, I think we're also seeing more and more use cases for blockchain, digital assets, and distributed ledgers generally. several of these intersect with, other sectors, insurance, investment, and even banking. Therefore, by kind of creating a digital asset framework where some key building blocks, you're enabling the future generation of financial services that will be built on top of that. So I think this is why it was so important for us as a regulator to be involved early, is by, creating these building blocks that take quite a bit of time. You're enabling financial services that will provide some important consumer benefits.
Thank you, Murad. And Natalie, sort of building on that, I'm sure you spend a lot of time talking to your clients about the legislation in Bermuda. What are they telling you they like about Bermuda's digital assets legislation? And what are a few advantages to the Bermuda approach?
I think the clients that we speak to aren't just focused on legislation relating to digital assets. What they're interested in is the licensing process, and what it means to be regulated in Bermuda and how to get there. And I think what we do really well as a jurisdiction is, to a large extent, due to the efforts of Moad and his team and the approach of the BMA. My experience and that of my clients is that their approach is extremely collaborative and solution oriented. So they really do try and provide guidance through the process, and particularly provide quick responses on business models. They have been open to considering drafts ahead of final submissions to help persons really fine tune their applications to ensure the best chance of success. So I think that approach is appreciated. I think, whilst doing all of that, the BMA hasn't sort of doesn't prejudice its standards, and as I said, that the legislation itself is clear and has been amended to take into account of the development of the sector. So we've, as a law firm, have been engaged with the BMA where there's ambiguity over the legislation. We've had the opportunity to consult on that and to put changes through and propose changes both through the BDA and directly on behalf of clients. And the BMA's approach to that is extremely helpful. I think, Bermuda has gone out there as a sort of early adopter and has first mover advantage. And I think the approach that it's taken with respect to having a fit for purpose piece of legislation as opposed to bolt-on legislation or amendments to existing legislation to cater to digital assets, again, has been very welcomed by clients in our experience. For certain industries, it's just a no-brainer. I think Bermuda's strength in insurance and the strength and depth of knowledge of the team evaluating applications at the BMA is second to none. And so I expect more and more applications in the insurtech space and more development now, which is really exciting. I think we've had feedback that the BMA's policies, so there's lots of policies, codes of practices, statements of principles, guidance on things including custody, cyber security, etc., are very well, they're very thorough, but certainly kind of the feedback is that they're well thought out and they do address the risks of the sector. And I think, in putting itself in that position, the BMA is helping to develop international standards. And I think, what I look forward to is the development of those standards and more recognition of what it means to be a licensed Bermuda digital assets business activity, a digital assets business rather, in other jurisdictions, through the development of those standards. So that, I think that's an exciting thing to look forward to.
All right, Natalie name-checked the BMA a few times there in her response.
I know. I'm a creep.
Do you have anything to add on this topic?
Well, I think Natalie provided a good overview. I think one of the things that I'd like to highlight is, one of the main advantages of the BMA for me is because we were and are early adopters in this sector, and we've built this risk-based approach and including a sandbox environment, we didn't just build that to provide an environment where companies could come and have a discussion with us, we leveraged that to become conversant in the sector. And that creation of knowledge and that culture that are necessary internally to support that transition or that transformation of the industry is not something that you can easily replicate. So I think one of the main advantage is really that the BMA at all levels is becoming more and more conversant in that space. And when you see new jurisdictions entering this space, it's relatively easy to look at a piece of legislation and adapt it to your environment. But the transformation that is necessary to support that industry at the regulator level, I think that's fairly unique, and it is something that we've spent quite a bit of time at the BMA thinking about what does the regulator of the future look like, and we really leverage the knowledge that we've had from the industry itself to build that.
Thank you, Moad. And Natalie, I did want to switch gears a little bit here and touch on economic substance if we can. Clearly a hot topic in many offshore jurisdictions. Bermuda did recently pass both the Economic Substance and Regulations Acts at the end of last year, and the deadline for compliance for relevant entities is fast approaching. Could you give the listeners today sort of an overview of the current guidelines in place here in Bermuda?
Sure. So as you mentioned, the Economic Substance Act was passed at the end of 2018 with an operative date of the 1st of January of that year, although existing companies had a transitional period, so compliance was required from 1st of July onwards, and also issued associated economic substance regulations. So the reporting is now due. The reporting in respect of the financial period ended the 31st of December 2019 is due by the 30th of June. And likewise, if you are conducting a relevant activity but are claiming that you are a non-resident entity by virtue of being tax resident in another jurisdiction, you need to make that assertion through the e-filing portal, which is now live, went live on the 1st of May. So the ROC is now open for filings. As regards guidance, so the minister issued draft general guidance, which was finalised and published on the 24th of December 2019, and more recently sector-specific guidance, which provides assistance in relation to each of the relevant activities on what will be regarded as being in scope. So it's important to check both of those to determine if you are in scope. There are a number of relevant activities. It includes for this sector fund management, but not investment funds. They are out of scope, provided they're not doing any other relevant activity, and insurance. And as a result of the economic substance, be aware that there has been other changes made to, for example, our investment funds legislation as part of addressing the EU's concerns and bringing in the requirement for the registration of certain closed-end funds. So the portal is open. There is frequently asked questions guidance on that portal, and entities can either register themselves or they can use an authorised representative, be that a law firm or a corporate service provider, to help them. And so I think we are complete with respect to the guidance that's now out there, and companies should certainly be making their filings right now.
Fantastic, thank you. A couple more questions here, and I'll start off with Moad. I don't think any panel discussion in the current environment will be complete without discussing COVID-19. So, Moad, what do you think the effect of COVID-19 will be on how the BMA oversees and carries out regulatory functions going forward?
Yeah, thanks for this question, Ben. It's the events of the last few weeks and now months have had tremendous impact on all of us. We're happy at the BMA that through planning and execution, we had a successful transition to remote work environment, and we're able to maintain service standards through all our sectors, including licensing. I know it's not necessarily the case everywhere. One of the reasons for that is, good planning, and it's something that we require from our financial institutions. This sort of crisis management planning, and we're happy that our own crisis management planning worked as expected. So that this is the first part, going through the crisis, and then reflecting on the future. I think everyone realizes that the world is likely going to be transformed. Physical interactions are going to be different, leaving probably a bigger space for digital interaction. So we are reflecting and launching a few pilots on how to better interact digitally. So this is one bit on how we're reflecting on the future, and understanding also the challenges that some financial institutions worldwide will be facing. We also intend to pilot a few projects to facilitate compliance through the use of RegTech and SoupTech solutions. Of course, some of the processes are currently still paper-based. This is something we're currently looking at, and we want to facilitate doing business as much as possible in this digital environment, uh, because it was already initiated. It's just a matter of focusing and delivering on these important initiatives.
Thank you, Mad. So it does sound like it's business as usual for the BMA. And sort of question to Natalie, I mean, it's certainly the case at EY, and I'm sure Walker's, that, business as usual, although we're certainly holding more virtual meetings. But Natalie, what's a 1-minute wrap up of sort of the discussions you've been having internally or with your clients regarding COVID-19 and economic substance? And, do you think we're going to reach a new normal here?
Yeah, it's a good question, because what's really sort of been occupying clients' minds at the minute is how, in fact, you can satisfy economic substance requirements when you have, for example, travel restrictions in the light of COVID-19. So how do you satisfy physical presence at meetings in those circumstances? Now, the registrar of companies in Bermuda helpfully issued an industry notice covering that and indicated he would obviously have regard to where meetings could not be held in Bermuda due to travel restrictions. But I think, there's certainly at the one end, this requirement for physical presence and the importance of board meetings and physically being in the same space. And as Moad said, is sort of the new normal is moving towards digitization and holding of virtual meetings and handling things in a much more virtual way. So, in many ways, we've got new laws that really don't take that into account. Other questions that we've been getting are how to handle transaction documents and signatures where you can't be physically present, you can't provide wet ink signatures. So we've been reviewing, a lot of the software out there, such as DocuSign, against Bermuda's laws to ensure that the proper formalities for legal documents, executions of those can be met. And in most cases, they can. But I think, these sort of topics, this isn't, it is our new normal, and I don't think it is going to look the same again. I think people are more used to working flexibly, working from home, having virtual meetings. And maybe that will bring about some good changes. And as I said, we're going to be looking at ways to facilitate that in our existing laws, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. And I think we're running close to time, the top of the hour here. Before we hand back to Lanisha to check the questions, I did want to thank AIMA Americas, the BDA, and Natalie and Moad, and to the audience members for joining today. Lanisha, I'll hand over to you for some Q&A.
Thank you, Ben. And funnily enough, I have a question for you. Ben, what kind of impact are you seeing with your clients and business as a result of economic substance requirements?
That's a great question. Thanks, Anisha. And I'd say overall a positive impact. Entities that have Bermuda companies who value the jurisdiction with the expertise and human capital we have here and the strong regulatory environment. We've seen them taking steps, of course, to meet the economic substance requirements, but also considering what they can do over and above this and beyond this in Bermuda. I really think economic substance can be used as an anchor to bring further work into the location, into Bermuda, that may have been previously completed in other locations. We've had conversations with managers reaching out to discuss bringing work back into the jurisdiction. It was previously done outside of the jurisdiction. I think that's only going to be a positive thing, not just for the accounting firm that I work for, lawyers, fund accountants, other service providers. So, overall, I think it's going to have a huge positive impact on the island over the coming years.
I'm very happy to hear that. Moad, this question is for you. How long does the licensing process take under DABA, and what are the licensing requirements in broad terms?
Yeah, good question. I guess regarding timing, the maximum turnaround time is 4 weeks. Generally, people can expect to receive feedback within 2 weeks on their application. In reality, there's at least one round of feedback and response. So, although a perfect application will go through in 4 weeks, in reality, it looks like probably closer to 8 to 12 weeks with all the turnarounds and feedbacks, which is, relatively short in terms of, the regulatory world. But we're working through some of the digital pilots to make it even shorter. In terms of the obligations, well, they're very similar to other types of financial institutions in Bermuda. So there are some obligations regarding governance, risk management, capital, head office. There's a special emphasis, because it's digital assets, of course, on cybersecurity and custody of assets. Yeah, these are essentially the large categories of obligations.
Thank you. Natalie, I'm going to finish up with you. And here's a good one. How do Bermuda's economic substance laws compare with other jurisdictions? Do they apply to every Bermuda company?
So I'll take the last part of that first. No, it's not applicable to every Bermuda company. No, sorry, I'll start again. Companies, yes. Partnerships with separate legal personality, yes. And limited liability corporations, yes. So those will be what we call registered entities under our jurisdiction. And then you would look to see whether they were conducting a relevant activity under the Economic Substance Act as a business. So that means that they're earning gross income in respect of a relevant financial period in respect of those activities. There are exemptions, as I mentioned. Investment funds aren't caught. In addition, non-resident entities are not caught, and those are, as I mentioned earlier, entities that are resident for tax purposes outside of or liable to tax in a jurisdiction outside of Bermuda. So that the evidence of that tax residence outside of Bermuda would need to be provided in support of a claim for non-resident status. In relation to the question as to how Bermuda's laws compare with other jurisdictions, so Bermuda, along with all the other so-called 2.2 jurisdictions, crafted their legislation according to the EU Code of Conduct scoping paper. But you did see the implementation of those in different ways and at different stages. What happened in the tail end of 2019 is that Bermuda had the benefit of seeing what legislation other jurisdictions had implemented and was able to level set. And it's important to note that during the the drafting period and the engagement period with the EU Code of Conduct, each individual jurisdiction dealt separately with the EU. So there wasn't any sort of transparency with respect to each of that process. So we did have the benefit of looking at the legislation elsewhere and level setting. So I think as of the end of last year, we're now in a position where our legislation is extremely similar, as it should be, because there shouldn't be any differences between those jurisdictions required to implement these rules. So you should see similar standards across the jurisdictions, and there may be slight different emphasis depending on the nature of the industry in that jurisdiction and particular guidance around that, but broadly similar at this point.
Wow. Thank you everyone for an informative and insightful discussion today, particularly to our panelists, Moad, Natalie, and of course our moderator, Ben. For those of you interested in keeping up to date with developments in the Bermuda market, I encourage you to visit our website, www.bda.bm. Follow us and make sure to sign up for our newsletter, The Bermuda Angle. And please do not hesitate to get in contact with me if you have any follow-up questions from today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.